Привет, друзья! G'day guys, welcome to another Soviet lens review. We are here in Meckering, rural WA, and home of one of Australia's biggest camera museums. Right behind me, the Big Camera. Why are we here? Well, today I am looking at a new lens that I've recently been sent by one of my subscribers. This is the Industar 22Y, an old rangefinder lens made in the Soviet Union, and today we're going to be checking it out, using it on the various sites that we can see here in rural WA, and yeah, just seeing if this lens is any good today. So let's get into it. Okay guys, let's take a look at some of the photos from the Industar 22Y, starting off with a pretty simple one, always a good litmus test, some flowers here, and most of these photos have just had very basic edits applied to them, not too much at all. And you can see that right off the bat, the Industar 22Y has a lot of sharpness in the center. These flowers look really, really good, and I think this kind of highlights what the Industar is quite good at. You know, it's got some simple neutral colors. It does have a little bit of a swirl in the background bokeh. It's kind of hard to pick. It's definitely not Helios 44 level swirl, but you will notice also some longitudinal chromatic aberration on these background flowers here as well. And the bokeh is just a little touch busy, and it does kind of cat's eye towards the corners. Next photo here though, this is an example of the front field bokeh, which I think is probably the strongest aspect of the Industar's bokeh. This is nice and relatively smooth, looks pretty good. The rest of the frame, you kind of see that nothing looks like super duper sharp, and I think that's partly because, again, this lens was not designed to shoot at infinity, you know, on mirrorless cameras. So even though you've got some stuff here that's kind of meant to be in focus, like, again, this wasn't necessarily at infinity, and I think I shot this at f3.5 or so, but yeah, it's still just lacking a little bit of sharpness there. Colors, I would say they're neutral to a little bit under contrasted, or kind of low contrast is probably a better way of putting it. Here we'll see some of the flare that's creeping into the image. So even though the Industar 22Y is single coated, it is not particularly fond of bright lights, backlights in the frame. And again, here you can kind of tell this was shot at, again, f3.5-ish. I think maybe I stopped it down to f5.6 or so, but still not too much is actually fully in focus. All of these shots are on my Nikon Z6, by the way, with the TechArt adapter on it. This shot's looking a little bit better. The bridge, I think, shows one of the strengths of the Industar. It really doesn't have much distortion, being that Tessar based design. So you can see that these straight lines are kept quite straight with no post correction. And again, that little bit of bokeh swirling in the background, a little bit of kind of confused, noisy bokeh. So you do see that, but I think the center here really looks good. And again, there's not much that's been applied to this photo, just a little bit of contrast. Yeah, it's looking pretty good. This is a good sharpness test. So you can see the sharpness here in the center of the frame. Let's go ahead and zoom in to about 200%. It's not too bad. You know, it's not the sharpest lens that I've tested. It's probably one of the softer lenses, not as soft as something like the Mir 1 but yeah, you can see as we pan out towards the very edges of the frame, it does lose a little bit of sharpness, but not too much. And the reason it doesn't lose too much is because this lens was actually specified to have a lines per millimeter of 17. That's kind of the resolving power in lines per millimeter in the center of the frame and also at the edges of the frame. And this kind of matches up to that, where you're really not losing too much resolution towards the edges of the frame. There's just a general slight lower resolution all around. And again, a nice little shot here. I think, you know, just look good. Little RSL shop out there near Meckering as well in York. We've got some landscape shots which I tried here as well. Now these aren't going to win any awards, but you can see that the lens was able to resolve the thin power lines. They look pretty good, and I think overall, you know, these landscapes, they don't look too bad at all. Nice neutral colors. I like the way that the lens renders the blue skies. And as we flick through a few more here, again, this is at f3.5 to show you the vignette that the Interstar 22Y has wide open. It does definitely vignette a little bit. There is no post vignette applied to this one. And here I just kind of got a little bit creative with the editing and kind of made the yellows pop a little bit more, desaturated everything else. And I think this is one of the nicer photos of the group. Got the book exchange here, and again you can see in this photo the little bit of a swirl that the bokeh has to it, kind of like a mini Helios. And again, the bokeh, you've got some longitudinal chromatic aberration there. It's a little bit noisy, it's not the nicest, but the stuff that's in focus looks pretty good. A little bit of a black and white here as well, just to show, you know, the raw kind of contrast that the lens can get without much post effects applied to it. And this was at a good distance, and you can see it's pretty, you know, it's pretty sharp there for a 24 megapixel image. That's a big camera, and this lens I wanted to show because you can see a little bit of the color fringing on the very highlight intensive areas. So the areas with high contrast where you've got, you know, this kind of dark pole up against the bright sky. A little bit of color fringing there. It's actually not too bad. This is definitely not the worst Soviet lens for color fringing, as you can tell from that. But yeah, something to kind of sort of look out for, particularly when shooting wide open. And the next shot here, I like this one. I love the grain in the wood. I love the kind of way that it's rendered the green. And again, this is like zero post-processing whatsoever. And this is about as much depth of field as you are going to get, because on the TechArt adapter that I was using, you can't focus any closer than this. And again, the lens is an f3.5 lens, so it doesn't have, you know, super wide aperture for you to use. And again, you can see the bokeh here, a little bit of blue in the background bokeh on the fringes. So guys, before we get any further into the review, let's talk about the Interstar 22Y and more broadly the Interstar 22. So the Interstar, like all Soviet Interstars, is based on a Carl Zeiss Tessar optical design with 4 elements in 3 groups, and the Interstar 22Y is no different. Now, the Y on the end of this explains why it has no focusing mechanism. So the Y, or in Cyrillic U, actually means that this was an enlarger lens, so used to, you know, enlarge photographic prints around 35, 36 mil. So that is why, yeah, this particular Interstar 22 does not have any method to focus. And how I've been actually focusing it is with my TechArt adapter here. So with the TechArt kind of autofocus adapter, this is the TZM02. I just screw it in, program it on the Nikon Z6, which I'm using to be a 50mm lens, and just like that, the TechArt does manage to kind of just sort of autofocus it. The TechArt, it doesn't like heavy lenses anyway, so the Interstar 22Y actually works relatively well for that purpose. Now, if you're buying a DSLR, don't really bother with this. You're only going to be able to get it to macro focus, but on an infinity, on a mirrorless camera like the Nikon Z6, you can get it to infinity. Now, this particular Interstar 22Y has 10 petals of its aperture, so 10 aperture blades. It goes from f3.5 down to f16, and as you can sort of tell if you zoom in there to the marking on the front of the lens, it was made at the KOMZ factory, not KMZ. You can tell because the lines in the logo there kind of crisscross throughout the prism. Now, the red P, I should note as well, on the front of the lens also means that this was a single coated lens. And because this kind of general series of lenses was made in the late 40s and early 50s, single coatings, you know, that was a relatively new thing back then for anyone. So that is why they kind of advertised it there. Now, don't quote me on this because I haven't had much experience with 50s lenses, but I believe that the serial number here being 03 means that it was made in 1953. But feel free to jump in the comments if you think it could be different. Yeah, that is basically it. Look, these lenses, the Interstar 22s in general, they were a very inexpensive Tessar, you know, tried and true design that were used across different Soviet rangefinders, from the Feds to the Zorkis, a bunch of different ones like that. And the Interstar 22Y was made because, well, Soviets needed some enlarged lenses. They knew this optical formula worked, and it does work still today. You know, you can take photos with on digital cameras like we're going to see now and get some pretty good results. So let's jump in to some more photos. Okay, getting back into it now, a few more quick shots with the Industar 22Y. This is an architectural shot in the middle of Perth CBD. I quite like this one because it doesn't, you know, this sort of shot, it doesn't need to be super clinically sharp. The lens is resolving what it needs to. The colors look great, and you know, another maybe slightly less interesting one there as well. But here, this is an example of how the lens deals with lights, and you can see that you get a little bit of bloom actually by default, and that's due to the kind of really old lens coating and the fact that it's only single coated, so you do get a little bit of bloom, which in a scenario like this, you actually want the bloom. You know, there would be photographers who would add this bloom in post to make it look kind of warm and fuzzy, but you definitely don't need to with the Industar. Then another shot, it's kind of golden hour here in the city, and yeah, I mean, look, I think this was shot at around f8 or so to try and get a lot of it in focus. You can see a little bit of longitudinal chromatic aberration in the background and fringing there, but yeah, overall, I like some of the character that comes out of the Industar 22Y when you use it. Again, in areas like this where there's a lot of texture on the brick, sometimes it will just pull it out really, really nicely like this, particularly when there's not too much backlight in the frame, even though you can see a little bit of a flare here. And this is just a pure kind of bokeh example. You can see the front field, definitely a little bit of magenta fringing, magenta chromatic aberration, and the transition from front field to near field is not too bad actually. A little bit of resolution in the center before in the background we see some of those bokeh discs with the blue fringing on them. And overall, this is definitely a shot which shows the kind of Petzval distortion effect, the swirly bokeh that the lens has. Another one here, a little kind of artsy shot, I guess, of a spider web on a pool fence. I don't know, I kind of liked it. Sometimes you get situations like this where the Industar's bokeh is actually clear. I don't know what caused this, but you know, when you get this, it actually looks quite good. Another shot here, again, this is more of a contrasty shot, lots of colors. I did boost the contrast a little bit, decrease the blacks up to white, so this is sort of maxed out, I guess. And it's still not super clinically sharp. This is straight out of camera, and you can see the colors that the Industar gives you. Really, I'm not in love with the colors. They feel a little bit kind of weirdly cool sometimes, and it's not that easy to correct. Yeah, this was how it was shot, and yeah, you've got it like cool here, maybe a little bit too much green in the background. Definitely looks like a vintage lens. So if you want that vintage look, then you know the lens definitely does deliver. And this, I mean, it looks like I've applied some sort of a vintage filter to this image, for instance, and this is just straight out of camera. So yeah, and another good example down there of the lenses, a little bit of fringing on the umbrella as well. And then finally a portrait to finish off. There we go. I like this one. You know, you do get a little bit of flare when you put it up against the sun, up against some backlight, but you know, there's still a lot of resolution here. You've got lots of resolution in the hair. It's picking out all of those individual strands, and definitely enough for portrait work. So guys, that is the Industar 22Y, a really nifty little lens. I'm not going to be taking it out too much in the future, I don't think, because it's just not that wieldy to use on the TechArt adapter. I prefer manual focus, and the TechArt, it just misses sometimes. It's not the most reliable of autofocusing adapters. But look, it was really fun to check this out and to use it in a scenario where really it probably hasn't been used much before, for some landscapes, for, you know, a couple of portraits as well. So that was a good bunch of fun. But thank you very much, guys, for watching. Hopefully a lot more content coming into the new year, and of course, Happy New Year, Snorvam Gordon, to everyone out there as well. Till the next time, I'll see you then.